Okay, let me make sure I'm unmuted. All right, guys, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, welcome everyone. I see some folks on here that I know and some folks that I don't know. So as I drop all my papers. So I'll go ahead and just do a little bit of an introduction of myself, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Jamie Spryn. I am the transaction coordinator for Brian Kemp's team. So I am in the building anytime if you have a question. We live in the back corner. I really do live here, I think. So I'm always available after this if you have any questions on the material that we go over. I have been in real estate actually for only a short period of time. So I joined Brian's team back in October of 18. So it's only been about 2 years, and I'm just newly licensed as of this year. So we do a lot of volume. So in terms of having experience in running through transactions, I'm very well versed in the contract to close process, but I do see we have some veteran folks on here as well. So I would love, if there's something that you maybe do different that you'd like to share with the group, please feel free to unmute and share any tips, because I want this to be as helpful to folks here as it can be. My process may not always, it might not click for somebody. I'm very much a list and spreadsheet person. So if you have other tips as we're going along, feel free to share. Okay. And also, I don't like just talking to my computer. So feel free to interact, raise your hand, share, ask questions as we get going. Okay. So as we start off, and before we get going, I want to ask, is there anything in particular that you're here for today that you want to make sure you get out of this session? Obviously, we're talking about contract to close. So we're talking about the time after we've already negotiated the deal and we're getting to the closing table. So everything that happens in there. Anything specific that you want me to make sure I touch on today? All right. Then you'll just have to listen to what I have. All right, so let's get started. Let me make sure I know how to change the slide. There we go. What we're going to focus on. So again, these items here that are in the red text is what we're going to focus on today. So we've gotten to the point where we've gotten our clients, we've shown them all the houses, we've found out something they're going to offer on, and we want to make sure that we're tightened up as we go through the process to get them all the way to the closing tables. There's a lot of things that happen in there. Is there anyone on here? I'm just looking through some names. If you could, I don't know if I could see if you raise a hand, but who has not yet gone through a full contract? Is there anybody on here who hasn't done that yet? Had their first closing?
Me.
Nicole.
Lisa Mitchell.
Lisa Mitchell. Okay. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Thank you for that. It just helps give me some context. So let's go back. All right. So let's get started. Okay. So as we go through the process, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of details that go in from just getting into contract and getting all the way to closing. And so often as we go through this process, we do this every day. And so, we know it like the back of our hand, but the client, for most clients, this is probably their first time or maybe their second time. But terminology and things that we do and the documents that they're going to see, they don't see them every day. So you want to make sure that you're prepared to get them through from the standpoint of understanding the process, how it works, important timelines as they go through, and things of that nature. So we're going to start off with talking about the timelines and how to manage that process best for your client. Let me go ahead and change up here. So we're going to start from this presentation actually breaks it down to building a buyer timeline and a seller timeline, because there are different points in the transaction that mean different things if you're on one side or the other. When we do this for our clients, we prepare a comprehensive timeline that looks the same whether you're a buyer or a seller, because we just want everybody to know all the important things associated with the contract. Let's start first. I'd like does everybody have a blank piece of paper near them? Can you grab one if you don't have one? Everybody got some paper? All right, and let's talk about everything that happens from the second that you get into contract to the time that you close. So starting with contract, let's throw out some things that happen. Who could share with me, once you get into contract, what's the first thing that you need to do? And we're talking about a buyer.
Contact their lender.
Yeah. Great, Katie, yes. So if you could draw on your paper, I just have a little notebook that I'm going to use, okay? And we're going to look at this from a visual perspective. But if we've got a contract, the first thing we need to do is let their lender know. All right, what else would we do once we get somebody into contract? We're going to talk about these points in a little bit more depth, but let's just throw out some ideas as we get going through the timeline. Anything else? Do we only contact their lender?
Title company needs to know.
Yep, title company. What else? Who else are we talking to?
Home inspectors.
How about our client? Are we updating them on what they need to do? And then also our cooperating agent. We want to make sure that we're communicating and in sync with them. And so that may or may not be the agent. It may be someone like me. So they may have an admin or transaction coordinator that they work with, but you want to make sure you always are, in constant communication with that person as well. Okay, so I've got here, my timeline's not going to fit on my piece of paper, but I've got here, we're in contract. We've got several people that we need to talk with right off the bat. Once we make those initial contacts with those folks, and again, we'll talk about that in some more depth, but where do we move through next? So we've got a contract, we've got everybody up to speed on what's happening. What's really the next process in your contract? So if you're working with a buyer, they're probably scheduling their home inspection. So Katie had mentioned making contact with home inspectors. So you want to make sure that you are giving them the guidance to make sure they're scheduling within their allotted time frame. And that it's, time is of the essence as they move through this process to make sure that they're going to fit inside there. So we always recommend 3 inspectors to our clients right after they get into contract so that they can reach out and get those appointments set up. Now, we don't schedule those for our clients. Is there anybody on here who does schedule that for their clients? Anyone do that? No? Okay. We let our clients do that. That way they can work it around their schedule. And so it's always good to, especially if you're working with clients who maybe this is their first time. I've gotten a few times here recently, a question on, do they need to do that? Do they need to do all of the inspections? So it's good to make sure that you're prepared for questions like that as they're going through this process. Okay, so next, home insurance. So making sure that they are speaking with their insurance agent around that, because their lender is going to need that information. So that's something to make sure doesn't get lost in the mix. Their lender should be communicating this to them as well, but just always something important to point out. And then if there's a home warranty involved in the contract, you want to make sure you get that ordered and taken care of. A lot of times, I know we place them on our listing, so it may already be taken care of, but if not, you want to make sure that you're ordering that for your buyer and getting that information over to the title company. Okay, so we've got a lot of big things that happen right away. As you're getting through that inspection process, what are some other important deadlines as you move through the process? Any other deadlines out there? Maybe earnest money needs to be submitted. You've got a title commitment that's coming your way for the buyer to review. You have your loan application that the buyer needs to be completing. These are all things, important deadlines that are stated in the contract. So you want to make sure that, number one, you're taking your action that needs to be done, or reminding your client and or checking in with the respective parties for those items. So we do a lot of check. We don't always just sit back and wait. If I don't have something before the deadline, we're going to reach out and make sure that we have it, and then share those updates with your co-op agent. The more you can share information back and forth, the smoother things go throughout the process. And that's, of course, the goal as you're going through. Okay, so we've gotten through all of those items. We've got our title commitment. We have they've done all of their loan information. It's going through to underwriting. We're waiting to get to that point where we have a final clear to close. As they're getting ready for closing, what are things that you need to think about as we're getting ready to close? Any thoughts?
Schedule the final walkthrough.
Yes, schedule a final walkthrough. Yep.
Review closing docs.
Yep. Great. We need to schedule the closing. That's a good one too. So we actually have, that's one of our task items, is to make sure. Sometimes you can get so filled up in the process, and that's an important thing, to make sure you've scheduled that, especially if we're in a busy time of the year and you have a closing towards the end of the month. I always reach out about a week to 10 days prior to the client's closing, just to make sure their schedule is going to permit. So if I know it's a client who has a very busy schedule, I might reach out sooner rather than later, just to see what time works best in your schedule. We have a lot of people who want to close early in the morning or late in the afternoon. And there's a lot of other agents who have clients who want to do that same thing. And title companies only have so many spots. So making sure that you're trying to confirm that for your client as soon as possible can be really helpful. So we're not scrambling at the last minute to get that done.
I think to back up a little bit, we also need to be making sure that any remedies were taken care of, that you have the documentation, especially if it were something that needed to be done by an electrician or a professional.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So if you've gone through your agreement period and the sellers are completing those repairs, that's something to always look at too as you're going through your final walkthrough. So if you don't have those receipts in advance, are they being made available at the final walkthrough? and then checking to make sure that any of those associated repairs have been completed is an important step as well. Thank you, Lisa. Okay. So we've got a lot of these big things as we're moving through. And I know sometimes for people, like a visual timeline can be helpful in terms of how things happen. The other thing we didn't mention actually is appraisal too. So that's a big one that will happen. I find that some lenders will order the appraisal right away, and then we have a couple lenders who want to wait until it's through inspection. I'm seeing that a little bit less, just because it's, you know, some things are taking a little bit longer, but we still do have a couple lenders who will say, once you're through inspection, let me know, so I'll order appraisal. But that's an important one too. And then making sure that that comes back, and where are you at with your value? That's kind of a floating item for me. That's not something that you don't have a strict deadline with that one. It's kind of floating throughout your timeline, but it's something you want to keep top of mind. And I'll show you as we get a little bit further, we use the tasks in Command. And then I also have a spreadsheet that I'll share in case that works better for you to kind of manage, but that's one thing you don't want to miss. So make sure you have that, you know, kind of noted, and helping to walk your buyer through that process and what the appraisal means. Okay, so any other thoughts from a buyer, things that we might be missing as they go through their process? Okay, we're going to flip over to sellers. So on the seller side, we have, you know, the same deadlines are in the contract. You know, from a seller perspective, all of those dates are still important to them. It's just they have a lot less action they need to take as they go through the process. So the buyer is scheduling the inspections, the buyer is doing everything with their lender, the lender is ordering the appraisal. The seller needs to be able to make their home as readily available as possible for all of these things that are happening throughout the timeline. So any inspections, if the appraiser is coming in, you know, occasionally you may have a buyer that requests to bring a contractor through or things like that. So just making sure that they're being accommodating as possible throughout that process. But from a seller perspective, let's talk about that timeline. So you've got an offer, you know, we've got those inspections happening in the appraisal. What other important things are there for a seller? Things that you should pay attention to. Any
If
thoughts
they have
on that?
repairs to make
Yeah.
sure that they've scheduled with contractors.
Yes, and sometimes this, we're seeing a lot less. There's a lot of, for a while through the summer, there was a lot of as-is. There weren't a lot of repairs happening. But when you get that thrown in the mix, making sure that they're staying on top of that and that they can get them completed prior to closing. The other thing is making sure you're collecting the receipts from them and any invoices. Sometimes that can get lost in the mix a little bit, but making sure you have that to present to the buyers if you're sharing that information with the agent. That's a good one. Anything else? It's important from a seller perspective.
Who scheduled their movers.
Thank you. That's what I was going to say. Yeah. So this was a tough one for us this summer because movers were so busy, and we also had some challenges with, you know, with our current environment. There were a lot of places that weren't operating in the ways in which they were. So like donations, for example, as people are trying to pack and move things out of their home, that became a challenge for us this past summer. So just making sure that you're reminding your clients that they're getting that started from the very get-go. You know, we just put something in contract earlier this week, and the clients are making a cross-country move. And so in our conversation, I said, your second call is to call your movers, make sure you have that set up. Because it's just logistically, it's been a little bit of a challenge this year. So that's a really great one. Anything else that comes to mind? So for sellers, we pre-sign 99.9% of our sellers. And right now, title companies are doing closing separately anyway, but prior to COVID, we would have some sellers who would want to do a roundtable closing, and on occasion we would do that. But normally we pre-sign most of our sellers. And so this is much like the buyers, we'll check with them to see what their plans are. A lot of times you already know this, but where are they going next? What's their plan for that? And then how soon do they want to pre-sign their documents? So sellers can pre-sign early, and they have other options too. So we've had sellers who have closed from California, so if they're moving, it's a little bit less restrictive from a seller standpoint to coordinate that type of thing. So just making sure you know what their needs are for closing and getting that information up front, and then getting that scheduled. Any other thoughts from the seller side, timeline wise?
I think on both sides, utilities is a big thing too, making sure that you've gotten them in your name and out of your name.
Yes, that's a good one. We have a task for that to help us remind the clients. And then I'm going to show you, Command has some nice functionality now where it'll send a notification to the client of tasks that you've completed, so they know their file is moving along. And we've built in some of those as reminders for the client. So it comes in an email in that, plus we're reaching out about it, because you don't want to wait to the last minute or have those missed. But yes, great one. Making sure you've set them up for that. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, what I'd like to do next, and we're going to talk about, the next slide here is about talking about communication points, but I want to show you all how we do a timeline. So I know some people just send a timeline out in an email. So they'll go into contract, they break the contract down into important points in an email and just send that. I think that's perfectly acceptable. We actually use, there's a contract that you can use from Columbus Realtors. That's a transaction timeline. There's one of those that's available, or Keller Williams, it's one of the two. But there's a transaction timeline that's available. We actually have a timeline template that we use, and we use it for both buyers and sellers. So I'm just going to show you what ours looks like. And I'm curious to know what other people are doing as well. So let me see if I can figure out how to share that with you. Give me 1 second here. Oh. Okay, I think I've got it. Oops. Okay, can you all see this?
Mhm.
This timeline? Yes, good. Okay. So this is something that we have in Google Docs, and I'll actually go back and I'll show you. If you don't use Google Docs, it's a great place to keep everything all in one spot, instead of just having, Word docs saved on your desktop, on your computer. From an efficiency standpoint, it helps keep everything together. So we have a folder just for timelines. I need to do a little cleanup here because normally once it closes, I'll move it up, but all of our timelines live in one place. And then we just have a template, as I mentioned, that we fill out. So we make a copy of it, we fill it out, and then we send that to the client. And the reason we do this is, I'm just going to open this up so you can see it. Is now you have a 1-page calendar that they can print out. They're not going back through emails to figure out deadlines. When I send this over to clients, I say, I encourage you to print this out, keep it handy so that you can reference it, check things off, etc. So it's a nice, concise way just to see everything that's in a 14-page contract. So does anybody else do a timeline like this separate that they send, or do you do it in an email? How do people handle that? I'd love to hear.
We've been doing it by email,
By email?
but I like this, yeah.
Yeah. Initially, when I was trained, it was in an email, and I was like, wouldn't this be so nice that you could just, the client could print it out? I've even, some clients that we've had that have been older, I've, hand delivered it with their contract, just so it's, right handy and they can go down through everything. Okay, so I'm going to show you when that's completed. This already closed, but just how much detail we include on here. So we include the information for the property, the in contract and the closing date, and then who our parties are. And then we just go through the contract and pull out the important parts of the contract. A new thing that we have added in is the condo docs and HOA docs. So I do have that now on my timeline because that's stated in the contract. So that's an important deadline you certainly don't want to miss, but that also appears on the timeline. But we go through, we pull everything out. To do this timeline, it maybe takes me, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how much typing I have to do for the additional terms and conditions or things like that. But type all of that in there. I do the calculations for them. So I'll do what the contract states for calendar days, but then I also give them the exact date. So that way they have that, they can write it in their planner or just keep this handy. But I give exact dates for them. And then at the bottom, it's all of the information related to the transaction. So all the contact information all in one spot. And so that way everybody is on the same page with the parties that are involved. So thoughts on this? You think that is helpful?
Very helpful.
Yeah. So it takes a little bit of time just to set it up. So if you are doing it in an email, think it's going back to, again, thinking that for the client, this is potentially their first time, and how can we make it painless for the client? How can we keep them on track with everything that's happening from start to finish in an easily understood way? So I know sometimes people like, visually like a timeline, but this is just, straightforward. Here's what you need to focus on. And I'm happy to share a template for this. If anybody finds it helpful, just let me know and I can share that. Okay. And then, all right, let's keep going here. Now I got to figure out how to share my screen back to that PowerPoint. There, I think. Can you all see it? All right, perfect. Sorry, I'm not super savvy as a host. All right, so let's talk about, I mentioned before that we kind of did this timeline. We've got these points that we need to be communicating with people. So let's talk about what we're communicating and why. So first thing when we get into contract, we said we need to reach out to the lender first. What are we sending the lender?
We need to send them a copy of the contract.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we're sending the lender the contract. I'm going to come back out of here again. and go into my email. So we have templates that we use. I'm sure many of you do, or if you don't, consider doing some templates to make your life a little bit easier. You don't have to type an email every time. But if you're using Gmail, which I think most people are if you're using your KW email, Gmail has the ability to create templates right in Gmail. So I'm hopefully maybe going to show you a little efficiency trick if you don't know this. I know some people will keep them like in a Word document and then copy and paste, but you can actually build templates right in Gmail to save yourself a little bit of time. And so what I'll do is just come over here and I have them labeled for who I'm sending it to. So if I have a buyer and I'm sending the contract to the lender, I just click and it, hey, why did it do that? That's where my cursor was. And it will just pop my template in there and I update, whatever information I need to do. So I'm asking, or I'm letting the lender know that we're in contract. I want to know when their loan application is complete and I give that date so that way I can get it. And then I also want them to let me know when the appraisal has been ordered so that I can keep, kind of keep track on when I can expect that back. And then I will copy and paste from my timeline. I copy and paste the title contact information in there so we can start getting all the parties connected. Does anybody use templates like this or do you hand type it every time?
I just copy and paste mine, but I like the templates.
Yeah. I found that a while back and it was kind of, for a person like me, it was really life-changing. It just, for ease, it's all right there. And then I get rid of this red text after I go, this is just me, I don't want to miss something. But it gives me all the points to fill in for each person. Okay, so same thing then. Let's get rid of this. And let's talk about the title. I have the same thing. So with the title company, you want to make sure that you're providing your client's information, your commission information. I don't wait for them to ask me that because I don't want the extra email. I front load all that information that I know the title company is going to need. They're going to need to know who the commission check is being made out to, how much the commission is, who our buyers are, who the lender is, and then the home warranty invoice, if that wasn't already on the listing. So I make sure I package that all up right away. Okay. Well, I hope those are helpful. So if you're not using the templates, look into do it. And I'll show you real quick while we're in here. You just come down to these little buttons, the 3 little dots. I'm pointing at my screen like you can see me. You scroll over to templates and then at the bottom, you would just click save draft as template once you have it all typed out in your email. Does that make sense? All right. If somebody tries that, you have to let me know. Super, super helpful for me. All right. So we're going to go back. Here we are. All right, so communication points throughout our timeline. So we've got our timeline. We talked about we're reaching out to the co-op, the cooperating agent, the lender, the title company right away once we get into contract. What are some other points throughout where we're sharing communication back and forth throughout the transaction? And what are we communicating? So if we're talking about a buyer, what are some updates we need to give throughout the process?
When remedies are complete with invoices.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How about the appraisal? This is a big one. So I find a lot of times, I work a lot with our sellers, so I know when the appraisals have been scheduled, And then it's, we'll sit around and we're like, where's that appraisal update? Where's the update? Where's the update? So as a buyer's agent, it's always good to make sure you're reminding your client to have them let you know once their appraisal is back, once they get that information from the lender. Because lenders typically, they typically won't share that appraisal with you, though they might say the appraisal's back, we're good, or whatever the case may be. But you want to make sure that your client is updating you on that, so that way you can let the listing agent know, and you're not just hanging out there waiting. Are we at value? Are we not? Do we need to renegotiate? But that's a really big communication point between agents, to just make sure you're sharing that back and forth as you go through. Other things that you're communicating with the buyer. How about the title commitment? So a lot of times title companies will just send that directly to us. So you want to make sure, if it's not a title company you work with often, on if they have provided that to the client or not. And if not, make sure you're sharing it with the client. I think sometimes, I know early on, I just made an assumption that they sent that. And then I very quickly learned that they don't just always send that. So making sure that you're in communication with the title company on what information has been provided to your buyer and what hasn't. And then making sure your buyer knows who they can contact if they have questions on particular items that might be in the title commitment. Other things other folks that they may want to consult with or communicate with throughout the process, if they have an attorney involved. We have something that's in contract now where their attorney is involved. And so I'm needing to make sure that information is communicated with them as things develop throughout the process. So that's another party in our transaction that needs to be up to speed on where things are. Okay. As we go through the process, so we've talked about points in time that we would be communicating back and forth. What types of documents are we using throughout this process? So if we've got, for example, we've got our request to remedy. We're going to be sending that over. And what do we communicate with that when we send that over to the listing agent? If we're requesting remedies, we want to make sure that we're first sending the request, but then also including that inspection report and potentially any estimates if the buyer had that completed, to kind of, to add to whatever the request is that they're making. We want to make sure that we're sharing all of those documents as we go through the process. We want to make sure that we're doing that in our allotted time frame too. So that's where that timeline comes back into play, and making sure that we're sticking to those deadlines. Has everyone in here attended Lori's Contracts 2 class?
Yes.
Good. If you haven't, I would really encourage you to go to that one. So Contracts 1, she talks about the contract as a whole. She goes section by section. But in Contracts 2, Lori will go through all of the documents that happen after the contract. So there's a lot of documents that you might be using throughout the process. So your request to remedy, and then your contract addendum is usually the two that you're going to be using the most as you go through the process. But making sure that you're doing those documents as they go. So let's talk about addendums for a minute. So if you have let's say there's a credit that comes out of your agreement on the remedies, that's a document you need to make sure that you're getting to the appropriate places. So I always make sure that I'm communicating with my co-oping agent. If we have the buyer, then I'm making sure that that addendum gets over to the lender as it needs to. And then I'll ask, are you going to get this to the title company, or do you want me to send that over? But just making sure that those parties are getting all the documentation, so there's no delay at the end. So if you forget to send the lender an addendum that has a credit, and you're close to closing and you're like, oh gosh, I forgot to send this over, that's something that could potentially result in a closing delay. So you want to make sure as those things are happening that you're communicating that information with all of the involved parties. Okay. All right. Let's talk about getting the deal closed. So that's what we want. We all want to come to the table, and the goal is to get to the closing table. And I actually just had a client ask me this week, like, what's the date that's firm that we know the deal is going to close? Anybody ever gotten that question before? So they're worried about getting through the inspections. And I said, and then we have another hurdle that is the appraisal and making sure that we get through that. And then after that, there's still things that are happening in the background. So we've got, the title commitment. Was there anything on there that needs to be cleared? Is everything moving along with the buyer's financing? Are there any obstacles, as they're going through that process? So the real answer to is there, when's the date that I can be sure my home is going to close? That would be when you're sitting at the closing table and the buyer is signing the final papers. There's not really a date otherwise. Anything can happen up until that point in time. So our job is, once we get into contract, is to make sure that we can get them to the closing table. And there's a lot of things that could go awry during the process. So let's talk about some examples of things that what are common or even uncommon reasons that something falls out of contract. What are some reasons we don't get to the closing table? Inspection's a common one. So maybe a buyer doesn't like things that they've seen in the inspection report. If it scares them off a little bit, it's certainly something. We recently had, this is, probably a little bit more common right now. Unfortunately, we had something in contract this fall and our client lost her job, which then posed an issue for financing. Anything else that comes to mind? Does anybody have any, anything unusual that resulted in a deal not closing? We recently had a property out at Buckeye Lake that took 2 months to close because we ran into a little block of land that the sellers had thought they owned that went out to the lake line. And as it turned out, they didn't actually own that block of land that they thought they owned. And we ended up getting ODNR involved in the title company and attorneys. And there were a number of times throughout that transaction that honestly thought it was going to fall apart. I didn't think we were going to close. And so when you talk about getting from point A to point B, the thing that got that deal closed was just a whole lot of open communication. We worked very closely with the buyers who were represented by, they were unrepresented. They had an attorney. One of them was an attorney taking care of the contract, but just working very closely with them and communicating back and forth. Here's where we are. Here's where you are. Here's what the title company has found. Here's what the attorney says. That open communication is the only thing that got that deal to the closing table. There was so many times that, you know, it wasn't going to get there. What are things that we can do to help make sure we get from the contract to the closing table? So communication is one. Any other thoughts? So I think one thing that can help as you go through the process, whether you're working with a buyer or a seller, is just making sure that upfront you're setting good expectations with them on what the process looks like. As I mentioned before, you know, we do this every day, and in some ways there's not a lot of emotion for us in that process. I mean, there may be depending on your relationship with the client, but it's a very emotional process for the client. And sometimes those emotions can kind of get in the way a little bit. So it's just making sure upfront you're setting expectations of what's going to happen, and then communicating as you're going through the process with your client. How about with your co-op agents too? This is something, this is a big piece of the puzzle, but just making sure from the get-go that you're setting up for the best relationship with them throughout the transaction. That will certainly make things easier as you go through the process. Anybody agree with that? Have you had a co-oping agent where it's been challenging? I mean, that makes it a little bit, just makes everything tougher as you go through the process.
I can't speak from the real estate side because I'm a new agent, but I can speak from the lender side and the
Yeah.
closing attorney side. It doesn't help to place blame when things are blowing up. You just need to do what you need to do to get it fixed. The rhetoric
Absolutely.
and, screaming at each other. I've seen agents come down to screaming at each other and I'm never using you again. It just doesn't, it's not healthy, and it doesn't get you to your end goal. So you got to keep that in check.
Yeah, I agree, Lisa. Yeah. It's if you can, sometimes things get, when things get a little hairy, it can be, you can get really frustrated. I mean, I've gotten very frustrated, throughout some deals, and you may have your opinions and what you want to say, but remember that you're a professional as you're moving through this process, and, respect the other people on the other side of the table, whether that's the lender, the title company, your co-op agent. It's all just going to help as you get through the process. And if you've made a mistake, then I've made a mistake. Here's how we are going to address this. But exactly as Lisa said, placing blame isn't going to help move
I think
the
that
deal any
90% of
closer.
the time, the reason that happens is because there isn't communication between everyone involved.
Right?
Someone,
I agree.
the lender is dragging their feet or whatever. They don't want to say, "Oh, we're 3 weeks out." They don't want to say that to you. They just want to try to fix it on their own without communicating that. And that's just not, it's not setting the expectation.
I agree. And I think too, from our side, Lisa, that's a great point, but also just making sure we're doing our part in reaching out and checking in for those updates too. So showing that you are staying on top of it versus sitting back and waiting for someone to come to you with an update. So if you've not done a lot of transactions yet, you'll probably get into a point where you're working with some of the same title representatives or lenders. And then as you build that relationship, that becomes so much easier than it is at first. So if you're feeling like it's a little challenging starting out, it does get better as you start to build those. But yeah, that open communication and just always reaching out for updates, making sure you know what's going on in the process, being involved in the process is really important. Okay. So we've talked a little bit in terms of the timeline. So I like to go through, as I mentioned, I break down all of the important deadlines in the transaction. I put them on the timeline. I'd also like to share something that we have used with our team, especially when we've gotten into busy months where we have 15 things in contract and you have a lot of timelines to deal with. But even if you're on your own and you're managing your contract to close process on your own and you have more than one thing going and you've got competing deadlines, you have to keep track of all those deadlines. And I created a spreadsheet that we use that I just want to share. How do I get it? Here we go. This is something we've used on our team. We call it the WAG. It just stands for week at a glance. And this is an old one that I saved that just has some activity on it. But what we do is we go through, so we create that timeline for the client, but then this is all the timelines for us in one spreadsheet. And so I use a color coding system to, let me see here, let me move this over. Keep track of everything that's going on. So I'd put all the timelines on here. I leave it would be white if nothing has been completed. And then as items come due, they go to green. So you know that week you can come in, I look on, Friday for the next week, I highlight everything green that's due. So I know, what's important. I come in and as those deadlines approach, if it's been completed, then it turns to gray. And if something is for some reason past due, then it's red, so that you make sure, because if you have a red block, you're likely out of contract, depending on what it is, and you want to make sure that you're aware of that. So this has been really helpful for us as a team to be able to just look and see, what do we need to focus on this week? What's the important things that are coming up? So that, and it kind of keeps you on track for moving all the way from contract to close. Does anybody use something? I'm interested to know what other people do. Do you do something like this to keep track? Do you look at your individual timelines? How do you keep track of everything that's going on in your transactions for you?
I put mine in my planner and on my phone to alert me a day or two before the due date.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else do that? Do you use a Google Calendar? I know some agents use Folio. Anybody else? So for me, I know from Katie's perspective, I think that's what a lot of our agents on our team have done. I've seen them write it in their planner or put it on their Google Calendar or whatever to manage the transaction. For me, I just needed to have a big picture too, because I'm managing all the transactions, not just, one or two. So this was a great way to just really have a snapshot view of all of those transactions. So if you're if you're on a team or you're doing a lot of production, a system like this might be helpful. What's also new, and we'll jump into this in a minute, but Command can also give you those reminders in tasks, so in the form of tasks. So we'll go through that. I don't know if anybody's using that yet, but it's really great to be able to keep on track in kind of like a systematic way online, if that's your preference. Okay, let's jump back in here. And this, we already talked about this a little bit, but just making sure that you're, making sure that you're maintaining that relationship with the other agent. And again, that starts from the very beginning to make sure that, where did my slideshow go? Oh, give me 1 second here. Something that interrupted my. There we go. Sorry about that. All right. Just making sure from the get-go that you're setting, a nice professional tone with that other agent. It just helps as you get into other points of negotiation throughout the process. So if you can set that up initially in your discussions all the way through, it's going to help when you go to do, if you're having a remedy negotiation, or if it comes down to the property not appraising and you're renegotiating price, or whatever the case may be with that. It's not just that initial negotiation that you should be prepared for, but making sure that you're maintaining that relationship throughout. Any other thoughts on the relationship with your cooperating agent? Any tips? Anything you do to help make that process smoother? All right. All right, let's talk about, dang it, I keep clicking that. All right, who's purchased, is there anybody who purchased a home before they became a realtor? Did you have a realtor you worked with?
Several homes.
Several homes, okay.
Carol Shear was my realtor.
Who said that? I can't see.
Molly.
Oh, okay, she was,
Yeah.
interesting, okay.
Yeah.
So what did you want from your realtor throughout the process? So again, I've mentioned this before, like for our clients, this is their first time or maybe their second time. We do this all the time, but try to think back and what did you want from your agent as you were going through the process?
I think for me, I just didn't know anything about it. And so I just wanted to be able to trust that they had my best interest in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I remember we used an agent, my husband and I bought 2 homes and we used the same realtor both times, and it was before I was in real estate. And so for me, it was just very similar, Molly. Like, I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I needed to do, when, like who to call, who do I call to set up an inspection? And then when we sold our house, it's like, who do I call to fix this, or, things like that. So making sure that you are ready and able to provide that information to your clients. So if you haven't done so already, as you start referring vendors to your clients, start a vendor or a utility list. Just have it all in one spot. So often, we'll share a contact from our phone, but that's very in the weeds. If you can step back and just have a list available with several different recommendations on there for your clients, that can be really helpful. And if you provide that up front, you can probably help to mitigate some of the constant requests as you go through the process. So we actually, when our sellers list their property, Lauren in our office, you can see her back there, she actually sends a vendor list out to our clients right away. So they have contact information for, like an electrician or a plumber or handyman, whatever the case is, right then and there. And that helps if there's still some things that they're, getting ready for as far as listing, or when we get to the remedy part. So we can always refer back to that. We can also still send it, send information to them, sharing a contact or sending them an email with information, but just providing that up front as just kind of a, we may run into this. I want to make sure that you're prepared. Here's some folks that we have referred in the past and that our clients have had a great experience with. Does anybody else share that information up front with their clients? Or do you just wait until they need it? Thoughts on that?
I think we normally end up waiting until it's requested, but I definitely see the benefit of being more proactive for sure.
Yeah. And they're probably still going to ask, sometimes in the moment, people may not think about it, but it's just nice to give that out in advance, just, so they can feel a little bit more prepared. Okay. Let's talk about closing. So we talked a little bit before about utilities. So we ask our clients upfront, sellers upfront, to give us a list of who their utility providers are and an estimated monthly amount monthly expense for those utilities. And we actually load that information in the MLS. You've probably seen that for listings before. We think it's just, it's a common question that buyers will ask, and then you can just have that information right there. But also it makes it really easy then when you get to closing, we'll take that information and we can just share it directly with the other agent. So that's not missed. As a buyer, so if you're representing a buyer, if an agent doesn't proactively give that to you, don't wait for your buyer to ask, who do I call to set up my trash? Set a reminder for yourself to reach out to the listing agent and get all of that utility information for your buyer and just help them through the process. Again, it's anything you can do to make the process as easy for them from start to finish. So some people are pretty savvy and they'll go look it up and find it on their own, but it doesn't take that long to ask the listing agent for that information and then hand it over to your client. Okay, so closing, who does closing gifts? Does everybody do closing gifts? I've seen some people don't do closing gifts.
We normally do.
Yeah. So we've become pretty standard in our closing gift process, and it's sometimes agents would pick up a little something else to include in the gift, but because we're a team, we do provide closing gifts, and we have a few options that agents can choose from, and Lauren on our team coordinates that. And so she has a task reminder in Command to check in with the agent, see what they want to order for a closing gift for their client. And then we make sure we have that here in advance of the closing so that we're not scrambling at the last minute to get that gift, you know, a couple hours before closing. Again, we want to make it seamless on our side. So there's no last minute decisions to be made. I think it was maybe about 2 to 3 years ago, Brian's team started to do photo books for sellers because we have all of that professional photography. So that's something we'll order early on for sellers, and then get that closing gift for the buyer. And then we've moved to things that people can put out in their homes. So, you know, they're cute things that can be seen when other people come over. And it's just a nice reminder that that came from us. And for the sellers perspective, we purchased them a nice book that they could set out on a coffee table or, you know, in a living room to flip through and kind of reflect on those memories. So, all right. Let's talk about the checklists for a little bit here. All right, so I'm going to jump out and go into Command. Oh, here we go again, this silly PowerPoint. Has anybody or is anybody using the checklists and tasks that are in Command? Anybody using them? And does anybody know what I'm talking about? All right. So in Command, you have your opportunities. And you can actually set up tasks, checklists, tasks, reminders that you can use for yourself. You can assign them to people on a team if you're on a team, or if you have an admin, you can have these tasks assigned. The admin can send you reminders through these tasks. And what's new with Command is now there is a client update email that goes out to the client, and you can decide which tasks they see and which ones they don't. And that will go out daily, and it can give your client a nice update on just things that have been completed, you know, behind the scenes in their file. So I'm going to show you where those are. I'll show you what that update email looks like and how you can customize these. So I'm going to start, and know that you can set this up for different stages too. So if you have an active listing, you can put, you know, if you're going to do a social media feature or, you know, a 1 week check-in, if it's somehow on the market for more than a week. We actually have a couple properties like that. But you can set those reminders up in there as well. I could tell you from our perspective, you know, before we get into contract, Lauren is going to be using this feature to track her marketing efforts so that the client can see. So she can put, you know, if she did a social media feature or if we ran an ad in a publication, she can write that task in there and have it send in the daily update to the client. So it's another way to keep them updated on things that are happening. And you can have that sent to yourself as well, so you can see it. Okay, so let's go under contract though, and I'm going to show you what those tasks are. So if you're looking at your opportunities, there's this little box down here. And if you haven't set this up, it may default to what was in there. I feel like it was maybe 8 tasks, maybe, I'm not sure. But there's some tasks in there by default. So you can see them here. And as you complete tasks, you can check them off. And this is where you can, if you want it to go to the client, you would check this box. So I'm going to show you how to edit these, but this is just if you've already got them set up, this is where you take action. Okay, you can assign it to yourself and set a due date. or you can assign it to someone on your team with a due date as well. Okay, so if I click in here, I can see our team members. Okay, and then again, you just set these up for each stage. So this is a blank one. You can see that anytime we check this off, this is going to go out in the daily email. And so I will have to show that when I edit. And then let me show you one that's has all the dates in there. So this is what it will look like. You can put as many tasks in there as you want, or as few, but I've built this so that I can send a reminder to the agent on our team, but I can also have it send a reminder to me. Whatever's helpful for you throughout the process. So, for example, here, I'm going to go log into the edit because you can see them better. Okay, so if you want to set these up for yourself, you haven't done it yet, you want to set up these tasks, you think they're going to be life-changing, here is where you do that. Come into your opportunities. I'm in the in contract bucket. And then up here at the top, it has edit stages. You just click that. And then these are the buckets throughout the in contract process. So we break it up into new in contract because there's very time sensitive things that happen at first where we're reaching out to the title company, the lender, the co-op agent, and our client. That happens in our new to in contract process. And if you're on a team, this is where it could be helpful. If your agents drag it into that bucket, you could see right away, oh, I've got a new contract that we need to get going with. We just are very open and communicate that to each other, but you could use it in that way. Right here, you could see again that list of items, and this is where you would set this up. So if you want to add something new, you just click add item, type in what your task is that you want to be reminded of. If you want it to go to the client, you can set that automatically. So every single time you do something, so every single time Lauren orders a rider change on our signs or we place a changed rider, she could check that box, and for sure we want our client to know that we did that. So you can have it default to that, but know that you can also just randomly add things and pick client update at any point in time. You don't always have to do it from here. This is just what's set up to go automatically. Okay, so you add them in here. What I would love for Command to do, it doesn't do it yet, but for the default assignment to happen. So if you could set this up that every time we get into contract and we're going to be sending timelines, that defaults to me. I would love for it to do that. It doesn't. You have to assign it every time, but maybe over time that will change. This is where you add them. Yeah.
Is there a place where you can see what that client update looks like?
Yes, I will show you one.
Okay.
Yep. Let me go get it. I have one that just went out, so let me see. Okay, here we go. This is what it looks like. So they get this email. You can't change the template. The template just is what it is. But the subject is updates for, and then it'll have your property address. And then this won't say Brian Kemp. It'll say the client's name, and I'll show you where you set that up. But then it shows the property, and then as you go down, it just shows what was checked off for the day. It's very streamlined, straightforward. It's just showing them exactly what happened.
So with each email, it'll just add another task on the list. It'll include all the tasks that have been done plus another one.
Yeah, I think it's just the new ones that were completed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'll have to double check that because I don't actually get them sent to me. So I'll need to double check. But isn't this, I think this is a great feature. It is relatively new. So if you're not using it, there's a lot of things that happen throughout the process, things that you're checking on, things that are happening. It's just a great way to just, there are things happening behind the scenes, even if you didn't hear from me every single day this week. You can, use it however you want. No
Yeah,
task
thank
is too big or too small. And you could see here from a team perspective, if you're an agent on your own and you're doing this on your own, you may not set it up this way, but on our team, we set it up. So TC is transaction coordinator and MM is marketing manager. And then we have like LS for listing specialist. And that's more of a, so I guess from an expectation standpoint, who's handling what kind of task. So if you think about a checklist of who does what during a transaction, this is exactly it. We don't have that on paper anymore. We have it right here. And who's responsible for what. Does that make sense? Might be a helpful tip for a team if you want to use that, but we just shortened it so that we know internally, who's taking care of that. Okay, so that's where you edit that. Now let's talk about setting up the client updates. So I'm going to show you two things. So this first one, let me go back and just point that out again, what I clicked on there. So I'm in the screen again where we're editing the stages and the little gear here for client updates. You want to make sure you have it set up to send those updates. And then you can turn this on and off per transaction. So if you have a couple or a seller or a buyer who maybe this would be overwhelming for them, then don't turn it on. But for most buyers and sellers, this would probably be very helpful for them to see. You can also get here by going to the just the general settings up here. It'll take you to the same spot. Okay, so you want to come in here and make sure that you have this information set up for yourself. Hold on, I gotta move my little, how do I move this? I can't see, got my Zoom box over stuff. So make sure you set up what time it's being sent out, who it's coming from. So this could be an owner, ours is going to be, if we don't allow people to make opportunities outside of our team, so it's always Brian. Client and co-client. So do you want to send it to both people on the transaction, or do you just want to send it to the primary client? You have that choice. We send it to both. And then do you also want to send a copy of this? This is where I was saying you can send it to yourself or to an assignee on the transaction. If you're on a team, you have that choice here. Okay, so then anytime it goes out, it will also go to any assignee on the transaction. Does that make sense? Okay, and then again, you can't change, there's no other options for this right now. This is just the template. Maybe they'll change it in the future. I think it looks fine, so we're good with it. Okay, so make sure you have this set up. And then let's go back. I'm going to go into, well, before I move on, is there any questions on editing the stages? Does anybody feel like this could be helpful for them?
Yes.
So these tasks, they will appear over here when you first log in. So this is how you know you have tasks due to. all the tasks are here. You can break it down by opportunities. And you can see here, here's your task. So it tells you, you know, what it is, what opportunity it's associated with, you know, who the contact is, and the due date. So we have a request to remedy that we're expecting to receive or should receive by tomorrow. And so we have just a reminder to know that, hey, it's coming up. Don't forget about it. So we set reminders for that. And then you can also see all of your tasks under the tasks section. You just have to click over to opportunities. Okay, so let's look at that client update though again. So if we're in here in your transaction, up here at the top, you'll see a client updates button. So this is a little bit newer since they rolled this out. But this is how you turn it on and off for your transaction. So by default, it doesn't send. Okay, if you want to start using this and start sending it to your client, then you'll want to come in here and make sure you've turned it on. You've set when you want to send it, who it's coming from, and who it's going to. And then if you needed to add anybody to the transaction to receive an update, you could do that. Okay. Any questions about the client updates? Again, this is right in the opportunity. Right up at the top to turn that on. All right. Let's jump back in. The next thing, I'm not going to bring the slide up, but the other thing is there are consumer guides to help guide your client through the process. So this lives in the app, in the KW app. So if you don't have that, make sure you have it downloaded, but you can customize this. We have not customized this yet. We're not actively using this, but I just want to go over it so that you know this is a feature you have available for your clients. And so to update that, is anybody using the consumer guides, and how are you using it? Is there anybody using it?
I just found those guides this morning.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, so it's under consumer. Over here on the side, you go to consumer. And then it's up here at the top, guide builder. And if you're not using this, that's okay, but I would encourage you to come in here and do just a real quick edit in case somebody stumbles upon it in their app. Because it does say that Paul will contact them or help them through the process. It's just some default language. So even if you're not using it, it is live in the app. So I would encourage you to just come in and just do a quick edit. The steps are very generic. So if you don't want to update this to its full potential, you don't have to. But what I'm referring to is this introduction here. It does say by default, instead of we will provide or I will provide, it says Paul will provide. So I would encourage you just to go in and make a couple quick edits there, just so it doesn't cause any confusion if you have a client who does stumble on it. Okay. But the guides, here it is. So you can come in and you can move these around and edit the language in them, and you can add steps. So you can get as thorough in this as you want. It's not specific to each individual client. So this is something that is, overall. But you could get, if you want to get specific to the point of providing your recommended inspection companies in here and their contact information, you could do that. You can build this up as much or as little as you want. So it's just a nice little feature. Again, it lives in the app. If your client is using that, it will help just guide them through the process. Any questions on that? There's one for buyers and one for sellers. And it's very, very similar.
And it is printable as well, like in a PDF or?
I don't know that you can print it because it lives in the app. Now you might be able to add it to your website. I'll have to look into that. You might be able to add it to your site and then print it, but it's meant to be more of a, I guess, a technology-based guide. It's not intended to be something that you print. It's intended to be something more that you look at, like scroll through on your phone quickly or on a computer. It would be great to print though. If you're using the buyer presentation or the listing presentation templates that are in designs to create like your, oh, I have one handy. Where did I put that? So we use the buyer presentation that is in Command because they're great. They're broken down really well, but this, the reason why I'm saying that is there is in here, there's a nice timeline. It's even more detailed than what's in there from the seller guide or from the buyer guide that goes through kind of step by step what happens in the process. So that might be a good resource if you want something that you can print. It goes through the process. Okay, I think that is about all that I have. So let me come back over here to PowerPoint. Let's see if we missed anything. Don't think so. All right. So is there something new you learned today that you think you could incorporate that you're not doing now? Anybody learn anything?
Yeah, I think the timeline spreadsheets are extremely helpful. So I added my email to the chat. If you wouldn't mind forwarding those.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Great job.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else?
I love the client updates that we just went over. We just got done talking about that yesterday in our coaching session with Josh. And so I think that's going to be really helpful.
Good, good. And did he go over how to set those up and everything?
I don't know if he knows that's there.
Oh, okay. Okay. I see what you mean.
Melody, did you get the impression that he knew that was there? He didn't suggest it.
From yesterday,
Yeah.
I actually was not able to attend yesterday.
Oh, were you there, Nicole?
I was. I would probably be inclined to agree with you. I don't know that he is aware that that is there.
Yeah, because he was talking about spreadsheets and stuff to, keep those updates, which is fine too. But
Right.
in my world, automation is best.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, it's really a great feature, a simple check mark, and then the system's going to generate it and send it out for you. So it takes some time, and I'm not going to lie in saying that it wasn't tedious to set it up, all of those tasks. Lauren and I tag team some of it because you have to set it up for both the seller and then you have to set it up for both the buyer. But schedule some time in your calendar to sit down and break down the transaction. What are the important deadlines? What are the timelines? What are the reminders? And then put those in a checklist, and then checking it off, it'll go right out to your client. So I've even set up in there an earnest money reminder one for folks who have earnest money due after inspection. And so it's just one that you can include. So it's just, again, they're seeing it again in that daily reminder. And then we send a reminder prior to that earnest money being due. But it's just little things like that that you can help to make the process smoother as you're going through. I think the client updates are great. Anything else that was helpful?
Could you put your email address in the chat if you wouldn't mind?
I certainly don't mind. Let me figure out how to get to the chat. Hold on.
Do you want me to put it in, Jamie?
Yeah.
I'll do it. I can do it for you.
Yeah. I don't know.
I've got it. I'm doing it right now.
Okay, good. I don't know how to get there. Oh, chat. There we go. Oh gosh. I'm sorry if I missed.
Oh, crap. This is what I get for doing it at kw.com. There.
Okay, great. Yes, I see these requests. I'm sorry, everybody, I did not see these as I was going along, but I am happy to share the templates. And so I will get with Elise to figure out how I cannot lose these, like I want to make sure I have your emails. So Nicole said, perfect. Yeah, Jamie Spryn at kw.com. I'll also give you, I have another email here too with Brian's team. How do I send that to everybody? Give me 1 second. There you go. Sure, Bill. Yes, yes. I will share the templates. Happy to do so. So I'll get with Elise on that to make sure we get them out. So are there any last, sometimes I feel like this is not the most exciting part of the transaction. But it's the details and they really do matter. So the content can be a little meh. But are there any questions that I can answer that I didn't cover? Well, if anything comes to mind afterwards, feel free to reach out. You have my email. You're welcome to stop up to the office. I'm always more than happy to help. Rachel has some really great trainings too on command and some of these features. So always be on the lookout for those. If you just need some more help with setting this type of stuff up, or schedule some one-on-one time with her as well. To get that set up, but I'm always available to help walk through anything. So feel free to reach out. I think that's it.
Thank you. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a good one, everybody.